Hello and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Liz Cavell, Deputy Legal Director at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I'm here with my friend Sammy Lawrence, staff attorney here at FFRF. Hey, Sammy.
Hey, it's great to be here as always.
Today we're not here as lawyers, we're just here as non-religious people. And for many people who grew up religious and eventually became non-religious, atheist or agnostic, one of the toughest parts of deconverting is often losing the sense of community that we got with going to church or being part of a church. So today we're talking about a unique secular alternative to church. It's called Sunday Assembly. It has dozens of chapters around the world, and we're welcoming Jared Millet, president of the Sunday Assembly of Atlanta. So welcome to the show, Jared. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
First, let's just start off, Jared. Tell us about Sunday Assembly, how it got started, how you got involved with it, just the basics.
The 2-second elevator pitch is Atheist Church, which isn't completely accurate. It's more accurate to say it's a secular community building organization that tries to replicate what we see are the positive things that churches and organized religion bring, without requiring belief in the supernatural. So things like potlucks, get-togethers, volunteer events, all the things that, especially for those of us who grew up in church setting, all things we miss about church, but without having the worship aspect. Sunday Assembly was founded in 2013 by two British comedians, Sanderson Jones and Pippa Evans, who were having that exact conversation. They left religion, but they missed certain parts about church. So they said, well, why can't we just do all that without the church part? And so they began Sunday Assembly in England. They started a few chapters there, and then I'm going to show my ex-Methodist side here. Like John Wesley, they came to the U.S. and evangelized and seeded a bunch of Sunday Assembly organizations throughout the States and in other places. We have one in Sydney, Australia. Sunday Assembly Atlanta had its first meeting in December 2014. I joined about 2 years later. I moved to Atlanta. I was looking for groups to be a part of, and not just, well, I looked at some of the science discussion groups and some of the other board gaming clubs and things like that. Then I came to my first Sunday Assembly meeting and discovered that they had a band. And I was like, oh, wait, you need people for the band? I'll join the band. And then, I got hooked, and I've been active part of the organization ever since, and eventually got suckered into being the president for a while.
As so often happens with organizations.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of the international locations plus Atlanta. Where else are there Sunday Assembly chapters?
Okay, well, here on the east side of the country, we've got us in Atlanta. We have Nashville is a big active community. There's a community in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I'm going to say most of the ones in the States are over on the West Coast. There's Silicon Valley, Seattle. During quarantine, we would make virtual music videos, and we often stole Silicon Valley's because they did some really good ones too. So there's cross-pollination between the groups. But yeah, you can find a list of our chapters at the parent organization's website, sundayassembly.org. And I will say that if there is not a Sunday Assembly near you, there are other organizations that do much of the same things we do. There's one called the Oasis Network. There's the Free Thought Society. There's one called Black Nonbelievers. So there are various organizations doing the same kind of community building work we are. So if we're not in your neighborhood, there's a chance one of the other ones is.
You mentioned coming to the Sunday Assembly kind of through your music attachment. And I think we work with a lot of non-religious people here, obviously, and many of us, whether we grew up in a faith tradition or not, kind of the last vestige of clinging to church or, organized religion would be singing in the choir or playing in the church band, or just still not wanting to let go of the music component of church. So talk to me about that and how much music and the emotional potency of hearing music, and we know that that's a huge part of how church services try to sort of have an emotional experience.
Yeah. And what kind of music
Yes.
too? Because I assume it's not, hymns. It's maybe a little bit more
No.
fun than that.
No, we haven't done this yet, but there are some Sunday Assembly chapters that have professional musicians and composers, and I've actually written a few Sunday Assembly specific songs. We did one a few potlucks ago called Welcome to Sunday Assembly that it was a sea shanty. But it was fun. It's goofy. I could still get it stuck in my head sometimes. But yeah, I mean, music is a way of engaging a whole crowd. Especially if you can get people to stand up, clap their hands, stomp their feet, sing along, because we post lyrics on a slideshow while we're doing this. So anything to get the whole room involved in creating a thing. From a neurological thing, that activates specific things in your brain where you're mirroring other people, and that's community building. You're sharing an experience, not just watching something passively, you're participating. Now, my personal journey is kind of hardwired into me. My father is a full-time church music director. So if I tell you that I grew up in the church, I literally mean I grew up in the church. If I wasn't at school or at home, I was at choir practice, or my dad would grab me and say, "Hey, Jared, we're going to do voice lessons today." Yes, I spent my entire youth through college singing in choirs. And then even as an adult, if I happened to be living near where Dad was at any point in my life, he would usually rope me into his choir during Christmases because he needed an extra tenor. But with Sunday Assembly, I finally get the chance to sing like my kind of music. We do rock, contemporary pop, occasional songs from movies, a little bit of country. For a while, I'll admit that we were kind of stuck in the 70s and 80s as far as our musical selections, but thankfully we've grown the band back with some newer members who've pulled us back into the 2020s. In fact, before coming on the podcast, I was practicing. I am mainly a singer, but I'm starting to pick up drums. So before speaking to y'all, I was practicing my drum part for a song called Hang Loose by Alabama Shakes.
All right.
Nice.
Our next theme is because our next theme is beach music. So we're going to be doing a bunch of surf songs and beach songs just because it's going to be summer. It's going to be fun. I think we're going to have some beach balls to throw at the crowd and get them bouncing around.
That does sound fun. Well, take us through sort of like what is a Sunday Assembly, gathering like, and like how different are they from week to week? What makes it different from traditional religious service besides the obvious, and sort of what do you try to recreate the same?
First, I'll describe the general format that most assembly chapters follow, which is what Sunday Assembly Atlanta did when I first joined and for a long time. And then I'll talk about how our particular chapter has kind of diverged from that because our needs changed. But essentially, if you go to a Sunday Assembly, official assembly anywhere in the country, you're probably going to have some music interspersed through the program, kind of like hymns. Mm-hmm. Some are more performances, some are sing-alongs. You may have a poetry reading or a literature reading in place of a scripture reading. With assemblies usually like to bring in guest speakers. You do kind of like a TED Talk format, which stands in for like a sermon. We have other activities like instead of where a church might have like prayer requests or something, we do a little thing called Life Happens, where when people come in, they're invited to write down just something going on in their life, positive or negative if they want, and put it in a box. And then we just take a moment during our presentation to share those with everybody. So because you can't since we don't get a chance to talk and greet everyone we'd want to, this is a way to share something like with the entire group and get a response. It's supportive or applause or whatever you need. I'm describing this, kind of mapping it to a church service because that's how I first saw it when I came. Mm-hmm. Someone without a religious background would hopefully just see, oh look, there's a speaker, oh look, there's people sharing with their lives, and wouldn't necessarily map it to, oh, this is a church service, because it's not. It's just kind of based on that structure. Now that structure carried us through quarantine, especially because we couldn't meet in person anymore. We could only meet on Zoom. So once a month we would have an online assembly where we would have like either a video where the band recorded their parts separately and we mashed them into one.
Wow.
Or else we would have recordings of performances from previous years, or actually we had speakers come from as far as London to Atlanta because there's no such thing as plane travel on Zoom. And we would just have people share what's going on in their lives and things. But of course, quarantine was bad for our volunteer base, our attendance numbers, things kind of dipped down. And we tried to maintain that format in Atlanta for about a year coming out of quarantine, and it wasn't clicking until we brought the potluck back. Because our old things would always end. We'd have the whole big, assembly. I don't want to call it service, but our service. And then there would be a potluck after. And of course, initially coming out of quarantine, we couldn't do the potluck because we were still masking and social distancing. And our volunteer base had shrunk that we didn't feel we could put on the whole song and dance plus a potluck. So eventually, once our attendance numbers had fallen a certain point, but we could start doing food again. Let's switch our effort to the potluck and not the big gathering thing. And then our numbers shot back up. So what people found more valuable was the interaction, the community, the social time together than hearing speakers. Now, we are slowly bringing some of those aspects back. We're talking about having speakers again. We're talking about doing our potlucks more often. If I can ramble for just one more second. When we switched our focus, Sunday Assembly is not just the one big assembly month. We have a bunch of other things throughout the month. We have meditation groups. We have camping and hikes. We have, of course, band rehearsals. We have an online virtual support group. Members of our community host documentary discussions. We have volunteering events. So every week there's something going on somewhere, whether it's someone's house or at a park. Our chapter has kind of shifted our focus away from the big monthly assembly as our reason for being, and the smaller groups that speak to individual people's needs for community and what effort they want to put in and what they feel is most valuable. And that's really kind of boosted our engagement up since quarantine, so that now we can talk about, let's put the big assembly show on again. Maybe someday we're inching back into that space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that kind of gets to something that I was wondering, which is something that I hear from a lot of other millennials and then Gen Z, is this need for more third places. So a place that isn't work, school, or home, but also where you're not obligated to like buy things or spend money. And church for a lot of people is that 1/3 place where you can just go to church service or go to youth group and just exist there and socialize, and it's okay. But obviously if you're not religious or trying to get away from religion, a lot of people don't know where to find that third place. So it sounds like you've really kind of found maybe the key to offering that to people, and that's really what they're looking for right now.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. And for some people, the big assembly format I was speaking of is still too churchy, but they're welcome. And for those people may feel more comfortable to at one of our coffee shop meetups that we do like once or twice a month, or they might feel more comfortable at a volunteer event or something like that. So we're trying to reach different parts of the community, different ways people are wanting to build community in a secular space.
So I'm really curious about some of the practical components, Jared. Like, one of the things that I think is hard, creating these sort of community building third place type experiences for non-religious people, there's a bunch of challenges, but I think one of them is that just we don't have those institutions. So I'm curious, like, but also you're trying to, like you said, for some of your members, even the service format is something that, doesn't really resonate with us. Like, there's just something about non-religious people that makes us non-religious, right? And some of the things about church that we would naturally find repellent, and one of them is probably tithing. But I'm very curious, how do you handle sort of financially supporting? I know it's probably mostly volunteer driven, but there are just like some institutional needs. How does Sunday Assembly try to recreate that?
Well, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so we actively solicit donations. Last year, our financial goal was to get ourselves back in the black, so that we were bringing in enough funds from donors to support the activities we were already doing. Our theme this year is building Safe Harbor, which is we're trying to expand our activities to be able to encompass more parts of our community and to reach out to groups that may feel under threat in the current political environment or just not as welcome. And so we're using that as a way so from a financial standpoint, we're using that as a way to ask people to either become recurring donors or if they're already a recurring donor, to maybe increase their recurring donation. We have expenses. We don't own a facility, but we rent space every month at a Unitarian congregation called First Existentialist Congregation, which is aligned with our values pretty strongly. So we rent space there, and that is a fee. We have insurance, because if we do things with the public, we need to have insurance. So that's a fee. Everything we do requires some kind of supplies, so there's fees for that. So yes, we do have expenses, and we do always make a point of asking our members to contribute, if not time, if they contribute just even a small recurring donation, and we try and keep how much we're spending in balance with how much we're receiving. This is always the goal.
Yeah. Is there any kind of like national or international institutional sort of strength amongst Sunday Assembly organizations, or are you all sort of operating on your own?
Sunday Assembly Atlanta as far as nonprofit licensing and tax purposes, we are our own independent unit. There is a larger parent organization, Sunday Assembly of the USA, and we have a partner organization in England that also organizes things and coordinates between all the chapters. And there is a national conference, there's a global conference every year. It was in Los Angeles last year. It'll be in Glasgow this year. So people from assemblies all over the world gather, share resources, share stories, help each other know what works, what doesn't, share ideas. Plus we have the usual online communication things. There's a Discord, etc., where organizers of the groups can talk to each other and discuss what's working, what's not, request help, request assistance, request ideas. So in one sense, Sunday Assembly Atlanta is kind of on its own as a legal entity, but yes, there is a parent organization that helps coordinate activities and keep a sense of shared values between all of our groups.
Have you seen maybe more of a rise or impetus in chapters wanting to work together, or maybe reaching out to organizations that have overlapping values or shared values to try to create just more networking or more maybe mutual aid or volunteer opportunities? Because I know that's something that I've talked to people I've known who have left churches. I had a college professor who, he and his wife, they were Mormons. They've since left the church, but they moved their family from Colorado to Wisconsin for a job. And when they did that, they contacted the Mormon church, and the Mormon church gathered all the Mormons in southern Wisconsin and were this family is arriving here from Colorado, help them unpack their house and set them up. And it was just this really remarkable chain of community support, and that was part of why it took them a long time to leave the church. And I know that secular organizations have tried to set up more community and larger mutual aid networks, but I think more and more we're seeing maybe a greater desire for that, especially in our current climate.
Actually, that's one thing we're working on trying to strengthen right now. We have had in the past many times when an organization has had a member in need, and we kind of rallied the troops to help move all their stuff from one house to another really quick because they had to, or someone's been in the hospital, let's coordinate, get information about where they are, how we can support them, visit, whatever. What we haven't had and are working on is kind of a formalized way to know where those needs exist, because it's become a haphazard if someone just hears about someone or someone directly asks. So right now, since we have all these, at least in Sunday Assembly Atlanta, we have a bunch of separate groups that don't always overlap. We're trying to increase communication between the groups so that if someone in the women's book club is having an issue and needs support, we can spread the word to people in the other groups that, hey, here's a thing we can help out with. But it is a struggle to create that same network that churches have kind of baked into their structure.
Yeah.
So it's still a work in progress, but we are cognizant of it and working in that direction.
Well, kind of on that same topic, like, what are we talking about in terms of the general size of your like congregation, and also how do you like, you want to be welcoming and open to all and less insular than a religious group would be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Many of us are eschewing that sort of like insularity when we leave religion, but also it takes some cohesion in amongst a congregation in order to replicate that level of support that Sammy is kind of describing. So how do you think about maintaining your congregation, like who that is, how you sort of keep that cohesion? Like what do you think about that?
Well, unlike churches, we don't have an official membership.
Right.
There's no like card you sign or thing that says I'm a member. When people have asked me, like, well, what makes me a Sunday Assembly member? I'm like, well, if you show up, you're a member.
Yeah.
If you comment in our Facebook group, you're in the discussion, you're a member.
Yeah.
And we are not exclusively atheist and agnostic. I would say we're agnostic on average. Creating a secular, inclusive community also means not turning people away. We just ask people to not bring up their religious beliefs unless they're in an environment where people are comfortable with that. We have people who have religious beliefs attend our events, but I would just if hypothetically someone started to steer a discussion that way, I would probably try to steer it gently the other way, just to maintain a sense of openness and safety for all people. Because I can imagine a scenario where, say, a religious person comes in and attacks non-believers for being non-believers. I can also imagine a scenario where a religious person comes in and wants to share some of their experience and they get attacked by the other group. I don't want either to feel uncomfortable. But surprisingly, the topic of religion just doesn't come up that often. And I think it's because usually when someone from a religious background comes to a Sunday Assembly event, part of it is they want to break from it for a while.
Yeah.
So I think they're just happy to find a space where they don't have to talk about it or think about it or have it creep into a conversation. They have that part of their life, but they want like something, but they want some way to socialize where they can just put that on mute for a while.
Yeah.
So that's what we're here for too. Yeah.
It's interesting because we hear a lot in the secular community about how valuable the community element of church is, right? That like it gives that sense of belonging and support, and like that there's no substitute for that in the secular world. But I think especially a lot of us that have kind of lived both lives. I grew up Catholic. It sounds like you, Jared, grew up in sort of a Southern Protestant religion.
Yep.
I personally remember, we weren't super church going, but like I was dragged to Catholic Mass plenty of times. And I remember even as a kid thinking like, when I would hear like, all the really super ritualistic religious stuff, and Catholic is a sort of a unique in that way. I think there are more modern ways of doing Christian church service in other faiths. But I just remember thinking like, for example, a lot of like, I don't know if it was like readings or just like sermons where it would be like, God is love, and like, so therefore, like worship God and share God with others. And I remember thinking even as a kid, like, this would be so much cooler and less confusing and boring if we just like left the God part out and like we were all just talking about like love and spreading it and like even worshiping it. It's just like, you know, my hippie 12-year-old was like, this could be cool, but it's a little just sort of confusing and relic-y and just like weird. And so I think a lot about like what we're saying when we say, or what we mean when we're saying as human beings, like, we really need that community that church provides. Like, what are the, like, if you distill down to what the essential, like, human needs that we're filling with church and tease out how much of that depends on religion or faith or spirituality or whatever. I'm always really sort of like curious what people's thoughts around that are, and especially you, since you experience that type of gathering regularly, which I do not.
I think where churches go wrong for me, and the thing that we try to avoid with secular community, and that actually makes secular community harder, but that's the price we pay for secular community, is that in church they tend to conflate the community it provides with the answers it purports to provide. If you approach life from a secular mindset, part of that mindset is you're kind of responsible for coming up with your own answers. You can read books, you can research ideas, you can figure out what's logical for you, what makes sense for you. But I feel that as an organization, we cannot do the thing churches do, which says, these are the answers, we figured it out, here's the solution. All we can do is create a space where it's safe for you to explore whatever answers you want.
Yeah.
Which means we don't have the tool of being able to say, these are the answers, and you can form community on the identity that you agree with these answers. In order to maintain ourselves as an inclusive, open, secular community, we have to reject that tool, which in a sense is tying our hand behind our back in a way that churches don't. But in another sense, it means not going down the dark path of trying to think for people that churches went down thousands of years ago. Even before Christianity, thousands of years ago, you know.
It's tough.
Trying to,
It's tough because I think what you're seizing on is, I think, something a valid response to what I had just said before you spoke, which is there probably is a component of like what humans to time immemorial are coming to church or religious services for a lot of times is like maybe answers to like life's big questions. The best sermons I remember from my childhood would be like, you walk away feeling, you know, I never was super persuaded by the supernatural or felt a sense of like answers, but basically a good sermon that you walked away feeling positive was like a pep talk, right? It's just like a life pep talk. And how do you recreate that without imparting that like certainty or that there's a faith in something that that we all need to believe?
We haven't had speakers at our events for a while. We had one last year. We had one of our members who spoke on health information and misinformation and how to determine good sources versus bad sources. So he gave a talk on the topic, for instance. And then, of course, we always have one thing that church services usually don't, and that's a Q&A. We have a speaker who comes and talks about organ donation and how you can do that, or like adoption, or how to join a farmer's co-op and find like the one that fits you best. And then, you know, the speaker will provide information, and then people ask questions, and people will ask questions usually for as long or longer than the person spoke. And for all of my decades attending church services, I don't ever remember that happening in a church setting. So when I say we're creating an environment where you can grow and explore, then, and hopefully as we start bringing speakers back and do more of that in our organization, we will have like, okay, here's some information might have value, and then we give the opportunity to question that information.
Yeah.
Because that's the key to the secular life is, here's information, now question it. You know, question it and decide, you know, based on evidence and your own logic, you know, what you take away from it.
Nice.
Which, like I said, is what makes secular life a little more challenging than religious life,
yes.
But I believe it's worth it.
Agreed. Well, Jared, before we go to crowdsourced questions. Just practical. If somebody wanted to start a Sunday Assembly chapter, what do they need to do? How does one go about that?
Go to sundayassembly.org. On the left-hand side, there's a column. One of the options is Start Your Assembly.
Awesome.
And you click that, and there's a list of steps to do. It'll almost certainly include contacting the national organization and or another group in the country to just find out what works. Just talk to people who've already been there and done that. And of course, it also probably help to travel and attend a meeting somewhere if you can, just to see what it's all about. Realizing that each different chapter kind of has their own spin and their own take on how they present everything. But we do tend to share the same values, the same openness. Some chapters may be more overtly atheist and agnostic. We lean more towards, let's just bring everybody in here and make a safe space for all. Your mileage may vary.
Well, I'm going to throw out a couple of the questions here on Facebook. So these are open to you, Jared, and then we can sort of discuss. But for Sunday Assembly directly, I'm interested in this one too. Many churches have initiatives asking members to participate in community service, some sort of way of having the church, have charitable goals or help less privileged people. Does Sunday Assembly, or at least Sunday Assembly Atlanta, have any similar goals or initiatives, and what does that look like?
Absolutely, we do. Our motto is live better, help often, wonder more. So help often is one of our 3 key tenets there. So every month we try to have at least one volunteer opportunity for people to go and do good in the community. In April, there was a help often week where all the Sunday assemblies were trying to do like one big event that week. Ours was, we went and provided lunch. Actually, there are 2 pictures on your screen are from this event. This was at a place in Atlanta called Covenant House, which is a place that provides housing for homeless young adults between the ages of 18 and 21. So we went there one Saturday and provided a big lunch for these kids, and it was great. On Sunday, May 11th, we're going to go volunteer at the Atlanta Community Food Bank, which I believe that mostly involves sorting food donations into boxes to go out where it needs to go.
Here's one that I'm interested in. How are Sunday Assembly meetings planned, and is there one specific leader or any individuals that the chapter looks to for guidance? Basically, this is definitely one of those things from religion that many of us probably look to get away from, which is hierarchy, or obviously there's no clergy, but like, how do you deal with leadership and decision making?
I'm not sure how other assemblies operate in this specific one. I know that before quarantine, we would rotate the task of who's in charge of this month's get together. So one person would plan it, and that person may or not have also been the MC of the event. As we lost some of our volunteer base and organizers during quarantine just because they had other things, or somehow it's all fallen down to, lately I've been the one organizing the monthly potluck. And I've been the one emceeing the monthly potluck, which also includes some of the aspects, like we still have the band performances, we still do the Life Happens readings. If we do have a speaker, I'll be the one to introduce them. Since our focus now is as heavy on the individual things like meditation groups, charitable stuff, our coffee discussion meetups, each one of those groups has its own organizer who kind of takes charge of guiding that space. And then we have an organizer meeting each month where we just talk about how we're doing, what challenges we're having, to try and keep everyone on the same page as far as the values in the community we're building and see what help everyone needs. But yeah, if you come, I would say that if you go to any assembly's big assembly event, there's going to be an MC who may or may not be the person who organized, found the speaker, decided like what songs band was going to play, etc. But that role probably changes month to month. So it's never one person who's in charge. There's not one person with a cult of personality, who's leading the whole thing, and the whole thing's going to fall apart if they go away. Which I've seen happen to some churches. If there's like one really strong pastor who then got reassigned, and the church poofed out. We don't want that to happen. So
what is
yeah.
what does the future of Sunday Assembly Atlanta look like to you? You've talked a little bit about this. Sounds like you've prioritized sort of the smaller affinity meetup groups and the potlucking. What ways would you like to see Sunday Assembly expand that you haven't been able to yet, or particularly in the current moment, what would you like to see happen?
We serve a really huge metropolitan area. So what I like to see right now, and is actually we're kind of seeing happen right now, is more people who are attending our current events are having ideas for events they can host and organize to reach even more parts of the Atlanta area. Atlanta is one of those places with a million suburbs. There's a lot, and we've had a lot of people nominally in our group and on our Facebook who live way north of town, for whom it's inconvenient to come to our events in the middle of Atlanta, because, as we say here, Atlanta is an hour's drive away from Atlanta. But we had a member came to one of our potlucks and a few of our events, was so excited he started his own discussion group under our umbrella out in the Gwinnett area, which is one of our big northern suburbs, and he's able to draw people into the organization and build community out there. We've had other people starting groups recently. We've had a women's book club for a while. We're now starting a men's wellness group to like explore and discuss different like health strategies, wellness strategies, and all that. So yeah, what I'd like to see us do more is essentially find more needs in the community, especially in the secular community, that we can address and find ways to reach out and address those and meet people where they are, instead of necessarily drawing them in. Although I would love to draw more people into the monthly potluck to listen to the band play, but that's personal gratification. The real goal, I think, of the organization is just to reach out further into the community, find the secular people where they are, build community in ways that resonate with them wherever they are.
That's really awesome, and I think that really gets to one of the questions that we asked earlier, which is like, how do you form a cohesive group? And I feel like that's the answer, whereas a church, a typical religious institution might say, we have the answers, we have the resources. If you want, any of our magical answers to life, the universe, and everything, you have to come join our group, and we hide everything behind this gate, and you have to sign up and get baptized or whatever. But you're going out and basically, in some ways, doing the opposite, saying we have people who care, we have these resources. What do you need? What interests you? What makes you feel like you'd be part of a community? And then you're really responding to that instead of trying to sell someone something.
Yeah, that's how I envision our goal. I can't honestly say that we've achieved success, because you don't ever do it. We have met that goal to some extent, and I want us to meet it even more. I want it to expand even more. More people, more groups, more community, more connection, and then more cross-pollination between all these different meetings. And, then you have community, in my mind.
That's awesome, Jared. Well, thank you so much for being that source of secular community in Atlanta. And thank you for coming on to our show this week. We'll end it there. And that wraps up this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. A new episode of our broadcast TV show Free Thought Matters airs this weekend. FFRF co-presidents Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker will speak with biologist Sean B. Carroll about the surprising role of chance in shaping life, the planet, and even us.
Everybody has generally heard of the asteroid that hit the Earth and wiped out the dinosaurs. But you got to unpack that a little bit more. The dinosaurs, the large reptiles, had ruled the land for probably 150 million years. And mammals, the group to which we belong, was a pretty obscure, small-bodied group that had coexisted alongside them for probably 100 million years. Well, the asteroid hits, creates a horrendous crisis in the biosphere, and essentially all the large animals die off, both on land and in the oceans. Had that rock not hit Earth, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
You'll be able to watch that episode on TV stations around the country this weekend, and soon on FFRF's YouTube channel.
And don't miss our weekly radio show, Free Thought Radio. You can find Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio or wherever you get your podcasts.
And be sure to check out the latest episode of We Dissent. It's the only podcast hosted exclusively by women constitutional lawyers, including myself, discussing state-church separation. Listen and subscribe to We Dissent wherever you get podcasts, or check us out online at we-dissent.org. And finally, if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. If you're a member already, thank you. And if not, please join us. And we will see you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.